The River Lea is very important because it's a habitat corridor through the town. That is one of its main reasons for preserving it and maintaining the corridor as a green space, not only for the recreation of the people, but also because it is a very important area of habitat. And it includes a raft of different types of habitat. There are wetland areas, there are wet woodlands, there are sort of extensive water meadows, hedgerows and other features of the pre-urban landscape. The River Lea corridor is in itself a very important mosaic of habitats. It runs from the Leagrave marsh area, where there's wetlands and wet woodlands, and it passes through areas of what was traditionally farmland and water meadows, and then there are old hedgerows and veteran trees and modern day parkland, and they all provide slightly different niches for wildlife to live. Leagrave Park in itself is possibly the most important site overall because it has such a range of habitats. It does have old alder woodland, which is dominated by alder and willow trees, which are characteristic of wet places. The rare bay willow tree grows there, for example, which is the only place in Luton where we know it grows naturally. That was supplemented by a lot of Victorian planting as well. So we've got modern deciduous woodland, which is mainly beech woodland, and that's developed its own ground flora, which is very interesting as well. And even within the marsh, a lot of the marsh was lost and filled in to make playing fields and Sundon Park Road and so on. But if you have a look at the railway, you can see that as it leaves Leagrave Station, it's up on a high embankment, and that was because the whole of that area was prone to flooding. So that whole area was the original Leagrave Marsh. And then on the other side of the river, on the rising land, which we know to be largely glacial gravels, that was where Wallard's Bank was. So if you look at where Marsh Farm, the actual farmhouse was, and Wallard's Bank up behind that, the settlement areas were well clear of the areas that tended to flood. So you have drier grasslands that are well drained, that exist within the Wallard's Bank part of the site there. And then in the lower grounds, you have the areas which are essentially, marshlands or previously drained areas of marshland. And that would have been very much reflected in the land use as well, because the wetlands were essentially used for grazing purposes. And Leagrave Marsh was a common, so it was common ground for people of the village to put their livestock, whereas places like Wallard's Bank, even though it's a very important archaeological site, was ploughed as an arable feature until it came into the council's ownership. So the kinds of habitats are very much sort of tied in with the history of the land. And as you come further south, you'll go through sections of modern day parkland and allotments and areas where you have a lot of trees have been planted. And then you have areas like Fallowfield, which I mentioned before, which is essentially an old open water meadow which floods occasionally, and that was how the flooding was sort of contained as part of the natural system of the Lea, before so much of it was built around. Well, if you look at the overall range of habitats that we have dry woodland, we have wet woodland, we have an area of coniferous woodland, we have a lot of scrub, we have open grassland, which is dry and well drained, we have wet grassland, which is marshy and is old grazing land, we have ancient pollarded trees, willows, for example. We have areas of formal gardens, such as Bideawhile and Wardown Park, but we also have areas where there is still cultivation goes on in the form of the allotments close to the river as well. And all of those provide a different kind of habitat for things to visit for feeding and nesting and so on. And so that's a considerable range within the river itself.